The winds howled over the rugged expanse of Slieve Gullion, Northern Ireland's most haunted peak. The four friends, Emma, Jack, Sarah, and Tom, had ventured out on what they'd planned to be a casual weekend hike. The woods, lush and dark, were known for their beauty, but as the sun began to set, an unnatural chill crept through the air, and unease settled over them. "Are we even going the right way?" Sarah asked, clutching her jacket tighter. Her voice trembled slightly. Jack checked his phone. No signal. "Great." Tom, always the jokester, smirked. "Relax, it's just the woods. What's the worst that could happen?" Emma shot him a sharp look. "Plenty. This place has stories, you know. Fairies, banshees, the slough. You'd know that if you paid attention in history. A spooky bedtime stories," Jack said with a shrug. "Let's just keep moving." As night fell, the trees seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches stretching like skeletal fingers. Shadows deepened, and the air grew damp, heavy with the scent of moss and decay. The group stumbled upon a clearing, and in the center stood a stone circle, ancient and weathered. Emma froze. "That's a fairy ring," she whispered. "We shouldn't be here." Jack rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on. You don't actually believe in that, do you?" Before Emma could answer, a low, guttural growl echoed through the trees. It wasn't the sound of any animal they recognized. The friends froze, their breath fogging in the icy air. Then came the rustling. Slow at first, then louder, circling them. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Then they saw them. Eyes glowing a sickly yellow-green, blinked into existence in the shadows. Figures began to emerge, their forms grotesque and twisted. Gnarled, hunched bodies with long, clawed fingers and faces that seemed both human and inhuman. The creatures were the slough, the restless spirits of the damned, doomed to hunt the living, especially those foolish enough to trespass where they shouldn't. "They're supposed to steal souls," Emma hissed, her voice shaking. The friends turned to run, but the woods betrayed them. Roots snagged their feet, and branches lashed at their faces, as if the forest itself were alive and conspiring against them. The growls grew louder, closer. Jack was the first to trip, falling hard to the ground. One of the creatures lunged, its taloned hand grazing his shoulder. He screamed, a sound that ended abruptly as he was dragged into the shadows. "Jack!" Sarah cried, but the others pulled her away, their panic too great to turn back. Breathless and disoriented, the three stumbled into another clearing. A small, dark figure stood ahead, a woman in tattered black robes, her face obscured by a veil. The banshee. Her keening cry pierced through the woods, chilling them to the bone. It wasn't just a warning of death. It was a summons. From the darkness, more creatures appeared. The Dullahan rode on its black steed, headless and carrying its glowing skull in one hand like a lantern. It raised a whip made of human spine and cracked it in the air, sending the slough surging forward. Tom grabbed Emma's arm. "The fairy ring! It's a portal, right? Maybe it can save us!" "You don't know that!" Emma cried. But there was no time to argue. The creatures closed in, their grotesque forms illuminated by the airy light of the Dullahan's skull. With a desperate leap, the three dove into the ring. The world spun violently, and things silenced. When Emma, Sarah, and Tom opened their eyes, they were back on the mountain trail, bathed in the soft light of dawn. The forest around them was calm, almost serene, as if nothing had happened. Jack was nowhere to be seen. "Did we make it?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Tom nodded, though he looked pale and shaken. "We did. We're out. That's all that matters." Emma said nothing, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't put it into words. Days turned into weeks, and though they tried to move on, the nightmare lingered. Emma began hearing whispers in her sleep. Jack's voice, calling her name. Sarah claimed she saw yellow-green eyes in the dark corners of her apartment. Tom grew distant, avoiding their calls and messages altogether. 2 months later, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She awoke one night to find Jack standing at the foot of her bed, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and lifeless. "Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You left me," he said, his voice hollow, a faint echo of the friend she once knew. Before she could respond, his face twisted into something monstrous, his features elongating into a grotesque parody of a human. Emma screamed, but when she blinked, he was gone. She sought out Sarah, only to find her apartment eerily quiet. The door was unlocked, and inside the air reeked of rot. On the wall, written in smeared black, were the words, You can't escape the slough. Desperate, Emma tracked down Tom, who had retreated to a cabin far from the city. She found him sitting in a darkened room, muttering to himself. "They followed us," he whispered when she approached. "We didn't leave the woods." "Not really." Before she could question him, he lunged at her, his face twisted and monstrous, much like Jack's had been. Emma fled, running into the night, only to realize the trees around her were closing in again. The familiar, suffocating darkness of the cursed forest surrounded her. In the end, Emma understood the truth. The fairy ring hadn't saved them. It had only transported them to another layer of the curse, one where the creatures of the woods could torment them endlessly. As the keening cry of the banshee filled the air, Emma fell to her knees, knowing she would never leave Slieve Gullion. Not really.